Recently on the channel, you guys have seen me do a lot of 3D printing, and that's because I'm currently working on a 3D printed fuse box for my FCRX7. Now, all of that is printed on this printer right here. Now, this thing is basically just stock Ender 5 Pro, and while it does great at printing me prototypes and stuff that I can use to develop the parts, I can't actually print the parts that will go in the car. And that's because the plastic that I'm using to print all these prototypes is called PLA. It's one of the most widely used plastics in the 3D printing world, and that's because it's super easy to print with and pretty cheap, and it has pretty low melting temperature, and that is what makes it absolutely horrible for car parts. Now, the way 3D printers work is that the material that they are actually using comes on these big rolls, these little spools of filament. This is the PLA that I use to print all my parts out of. Now, we can upgrade to a better filament. This one is PETG, but there's also ASA. There's a few different plastics that you can use for more high temp applications. The issue, in my case, is that this printer that I'm using can't actually reach the temperatures needed to print the high temperature filaments. Now, I understand why we have to look at this part right here. I'm gonna go ahead and take this cover off so we can actually see what's behind there. Now that we have the fan shroud off, we can see the hot end. This is what is keeping us from going to high temperatures. As you can see, this blue tube, we call a Bowden tube, is what the filament is fed into this unit with. The issue with this is that this goes all the way down to the nozzle where the heating element is. Now, this tube is basically a PTFE tube, which means that at higher temperatures, this will actually degrade and lead to failed prints, which is not what we want. So to be able to print correctly at those higher temperatures that those filaments require, we need to upgrade that. And that is why I have this. Now, the Spider is what we call an all-metal hot end. That means that the PTFE tubing only goes into about there before any of the hot parts of the hot end, which means that we don't have to worry about it degrading and ruining our prints. Now, the Sprite is going to replace our extruder. This is basically just the motor that pushes the filament through the hot end. Now, the nice thing about this is that it's a direct drive, which means that the filament is being fed right above the hot end instead of way far away like the setup that I have now. This opens us up to the possibility of printing softer materials like TPU or something like that, which we wouldn't normally be able to do with this because it actually ends up binding in the tube. At the same time, it'll also help a lot with print quality because we can dial our retraction in a lot better than we would with a Bowden tube style design, which is what I have now. So I think that's enough talking. Let's get these put on and see how it prints. So I've got to start out by taking the thermistor and the heating element out of the hot end. You can see I'm just taking one screw out and these both just slide out. After that, I can unscrew the hot end, and then I'm just going to cut that Bowden tube since we're not going to use it anymore. And then the Spider can just go right back into where the old hot end was installed. It's basically the same way that you would install the original. Next, I gotta take the rollers off of the carriage, and you can see right here, that's the original spacer for the rollers. We're actually gonna be using some smaller ones that come with the mounting kit for the Sprite. So basically, I'm gonna put the mount on there, then I'm going to put the smaller spacer that's included with the Sprite on there, and then I'm gonna stick the roller and the nut on there. So that's basically gonna be what the stack up is going to be, and then you're just going to have to repeat that for the other side. Now I'm just leaving the other side loose so I can sneak the mount in there and get all of the rest of the hardware installed. Then once I do that, I can go ahead and tighten the upper rollers, just give them a little snug. It doesn't have to be super tight. Now I'm going to insert the new Bowden tube. I have to get that thing cut down to the correct size, however. This took me a couple tries, so make sure that you actually pay attention to how long it is. After that, you can just mount the Sprite and get the Bowden tube locked into the hot end, and that's pretty much everything that you have to do to get the Sprite and the Spider hot end installed onto your Ender 5. Now that I got both my hot end and extruder installed, I have to go and run the wires for the extruder, since originally the extruder sits right here. Now it's going to be sitting up here. Those all come with the extruder kit, so that's super nice. And then I just have to transfer the heating element and the thermistor, which is basically just like the temperature probe that goes into the hot end to make sure it's at the right temp. I gotta transfer those from the old one to the new one, and then we'll be done. So the wiring for this is all very simple. It comes with the harness that you need for it. I'm basically just cutting the zip ties and opening up the sheathing just to make sure that I can kind of throw all of the wires in there and make it all look very OEM. And I mean, it's still an Ender. Wiring is not great, but I'm trying to make it as clean as possible, so I'm just trying to get it up there and make sure that it has enough length to do every move that the extruder will ever have to do. Not necessarily anything too difficult though. Alright, I've got all the wires routed, so now I just need to apply some thermal paste to both the thermistor and the heating element, and then we can throw those in, get everything plugged in, and get our first test print going. Alright, so now that I've got everything swapped over, I'll go over a few of the mods that I did, because I did kind of have to modify the way that everything's laid out on this thing just to make sure that everything works, but I think I got it perfect. So I'm just gonna show you guys what I did, and then we can go ahead with our first print. So since we're no longer using our original extruder, since we switched to the Sprite, I decided to take the bracket off of that original extruder and put it up here so that I can feed my filament straight into there, feed this Bowden tube down to our new extruder, and then this will have all the travel that it needs to get to wherever it wants on the printer. Then I went ahead and zip tied the harness up here just so that it kind of stays out of the way of all the motors moving and everything, so it has enough slack to do any of the movements that it needs to do. So I think that is going to be perfect. I had to zip tie this thing on here because at this point these bolts are supposed to bolt into the actual extruder motor, and I don't have nuts for it. I would go out and get some, but it's currently snowed in, so I don't want to drive my car, so I just zip tied it for now. These will be getting nuts at the bottom of these soon, and I'll just cut those zip ties. But for now, I can go ahead and feed my first little test filament into my brand new extruder setup. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing plugged in, turned on, and let's print something. Oh yeah, baby! Let's go! Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, that's looking good. Alright, so now that we've got that thing printing some real filament, we can actually start working on making some real parts for both the RX-7 and the IS. So I'm super stoked because now we're not limited by what that printer can print. That being said, this is going to be the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you guys thought, and I will see you guys next time.